Right. Good afternoon, folks. I'm Megan Tassine with the Personalized Learning Consortium. I see some folks who are logging in right now, so I'm going to wait just a moment to have some other folks log in here. All right, so looks like folks are coming in. I'm going to go ahead and get us started for today. So this is the second webinar in the Personalized Learning Consortium's webinar series from the faculty's perspective on adaptive learning. And the topic for today is exploring student experiences with adaptive learning and courseware. As I mentioned before, I am Megan Tassine. I am the Associate Director of the PLC at APLU. The PLC was formed in 2013, and we work in coordination with our member institutions to share resources, best practices, data, experiences as well. We take a community-based approach on learning how to effectively implement personalized learning technologies such as adaptive learning. So today we are joined by 4 faculty from the University of Mississippi. The University of Mississippi was one of the recipients of APLU's Accelerating the Adoption of Adaptive Courseware grant back in 2016, and we are now sort of entering our final year of that project. And so today we are joined by Patricia O'Sullivan, Karen Fouget, and I totally mispronounced your name, didn't I, that one time? I had it right the first time. Andrew Davis and Guy Kruger. And I'm going to hand it over to each of you to just do a brief introduction of yourself for our attendees today. So, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patty O'Sullivan, and I am the Adaptive Learning Program Manager here at the University of Mississippi. I work out of the Office of Academic Innovation.
And I'm Karen Forget, and I'm the Assistant Chair of the Department of Writing and Rhetoric, and along with my colleagues helped develop a personalized learning tool that we use in our first year writing course.
And I'm Andrew Davis. I'm an instructional designer for writing and rhetoric as well as an instructor, and I've been involved in this project since the beginning as well.
Guy Krieger, I'm the Writing 101 Curriculum Chair and a lecturer in the Department of Writing and Rhetoric. And as my colleagues just stated, we've been working on adaptive and personalized stuff for many, many years.
I want to thank you all for being here today with us and sharing your experiences. So just to give folks an idea of what the structure of this is going to be like, it'll be relatively informal, but more of a conversation with our attendees today. So first of all, Patricia O'Sullivan is going to give a brief overview of some of the work that the University of Mississippi did in coordination with their adaptive grant around student focus groups. So she's done 16 focus groups with students there about their experiences with adaptive courseware. She'll provide an overview of that. And then we're going to do a few questions with each of our attendees here today. And I'll be directing those questions for about 35 minutes or so. And then after that, we will open it up for questions. And there is a Q&A feature that the attendees can go ahead and click on and submit your questions, and we'll open it up to y'all. And I will go ahead and answer those questions directly of our attendees, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Patty, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you to talk about what you found with your student focus groups. Let me get that slide switched over for you. And can you see everything okay on your end? Okay, great.
All right, so just a little background. So as Megan said, we received the grant in July of 2016. We started doing some pilots or some early courses with adaptive learning in spring of 2017. And you know that we solicited a lot of feedback from the faculty, but at one point it occurred to us that we really needed to talk to students and find out what the student perception of the effectiveness of this courseware was. We had heard a lot from the vendors, you know, the promises of the courseware. We had heard a lot from faculty who had used it at other institutions who were very positive about it, but we really wanted to find out from students what their experience was. So we started running focus groups, and we also had surveys. So over
speaking, Jason and Serena Ramos, please.
Sorry. There was a little technical blip here. So over the course of 4 semesters from fall 2017 to spring 2019, we had 4 focus groups. They were course-based every semester, and then 1 larger survey that went out to the thousands of students who were using the courseware. So some of the themes that we found in the focus groups, cost was a big theme, misalignment, I'll talk about these things in a minute, bundling of products, grading issues, integration by instructors, and the user experience, the UX. So I guess I'll just start with the end of semester survey. So we had 24, if we can go to the next slide, Megan, sorry. Great. So we had responses from over 2,400 students. Like I said, there were 4 end of semester surveys. And we asked them 20 questions. I didn't put them all on here. Some were just for our own information, some demographic information. But just to get to the meat of it, we asked them what are the most useful features of adaptive courseware and what are the least useful features. And consistently over all 4 surveys, the students said the top 3 were, and the top 1 always was multiple attempts at quizzes. They liked the homework practices, and they also liked the instant feedback features or being able to view solutions to problem sets. And that was pretty, we might have expected that, all of these kind of around student autonomy and feedback and students being able to get the feedback to help them self-improve. The least useful features, they did not like encouraging messages, well done, try again. They just considered these automated and it just didn't mean anything to them. They did not think that the links to learn more about a topic were useful. Most students said they were just being very honest, and they said they're just trying to get through the lesson. They weren't really interested in clicking any more links to learn anything new. And again, that's not them being, the students were being efficient. They weren't being uninterested or incurious. This third one I thought was really interesting. The system asking them how well they know an answer. We've talked to several vendors who love this question, and the students on the survey, they said it wasn't very useful to them. But also when we dug into this in the focus groups, when we saw that on the survey, we started asking them, what is it about this question you like or don't like? And most students didn't like it because it ended up being very gendered. The female students, even if they were absolutely sure they knew an answer, they were never going to say that they were absolutely sure. That was just something that had been ingrained in them. You should never say you know something for sure. The males and the focus groups, on the other hand, even if they weren't entirely sure, they would say they absolutely knew the answer. And so when we brought this information to the vendors, we said, you really need to, hopefully your algorithm accounts for that, because the students just, A, they didn't find that a useful question, so they weren't really answering it with any degree of care or honesty, and then B, there was the gendered response to it, so that was interesting. When we asked students whether or not if they felt the adaptive courseware helped them learn, the way we could measure that was with their final grades. So if you look at the feedback there, 12% said that they felt their grades were negatively affected by courseware. When we asked in the focus groups, what would be the reason for this? Why would you think it would negatively affect you? Those students said it was just something they forgot to do. So they got penalized maybe for not completing quizzes, for not doing pre-tests or practice tests, those kinds of things that would have been graded. 42% in general said they thought the courseware had no effect on their grade, that they might have done just as well. And again, these are opinion questions. They can't know whether or not they would have done better or not. 46% thought that the courseware helped them do better. And again, when we dug into this in the focus groups, this really seemed to come down to students feeling that they had a certain level of autonomy so they could self-improve, so they could see the answer to a problem set and see, okay, this is how I solve it. Or they could see, this answer is incorrect, here's the right answer, here's why this is the right answer, so that the next time that question came up or a similar question came up, they would be able to answer it correctly. So it really was the features that gave them autonomy, and those are the reasons they thought that they did better. What was really interesting is when we filtered the survey for minority respondents, that number rose from 46% to 48% felt that the adaptive courseware had a positive effect on their final grade. And again, when we dug into this in the focus groups, you know, we asked a question of all the students, but some of them said it was just a matter of the courseware providing a certain amount of flexibility to the course so that there weren't due dates for homework, there were due by dates. There weren't quizzes in class. You could take it on your own in your dorm room or in your apartment, and you could redo the quiz if you didn't do well the first time. So that kind of flexibility was really what they spoke to in terms of how they thought it was helpful to them. So Megan, if we go to the next slide. Thanks. So some of the key findings from our research. So the biggest thing that students said in the focus groups was that they're frustrated by the misalignment of courseware with what's happening in the classroom, and usually that's a lecture. We had some students, particularly in the STEM fields, say that they felt like they were in two different courses, that the courseware was one course, it was like their online course, and then what was happening in the classroom was a whole separate course, that the instructor's notes that they would lecture from never really aligned with anything that was in the courseware, that the courseware was not preparing them for high stakes exams, that it was just the lecture notes that the instructors were using to create the high stakes exams. And so that was a really big frustration to them, because then they questioned, why are we even using this system? If it's not preparing us for the high stakes exams, what is the point of this? If it's not aligned with what else is going on in the course, what is the point of this? So as I've said before, the second point was that the students overall found that the courseware was helpful, and mainly it was the features that helped them, that provided them some kind of autonomy over their learning. And yes, there's some pushback from students who did say they didn't like the idea that they were supposed to teach themselves. Usually that was younger students, first-year students. When we talk to older students, sophomores on, they understood that college is a place where teaching yourself is something that happens fairly frequently, whether you're using adaptive courseware or not. Students, when we told them the definition of adaptive, because that came up a lot in the focus groups, they did not believe that the systems they were using are adaptive. And the definition we used was based on one developed by Titan Partners. And that definition basically says that it's the machine that adapts, the machine or the system changes based on the student choices and the student inputs, not that the student adapts or the instructor adapts. And so based on that definition, the students said that they did not think that this courseware was adaptive. And then finally, just to come back to the first point I mentioned with cost, students were very frustrated by the cost of these systems, but it wasn't just a dollar amount. What they were doing is determining the value of a system. If they have to pay $200 for a system, if that system is helping them significantly be successful in the class and get a good grade in the class, they see that as a good value and they don't mind paying that, especially if the $200 is maybe for a course that lasts 2 semesters. If they're paying $200, well, let's go lower. If they're paying $50 for a system that doesn't seem integrated with the class. They're not sure how much it counts towards their final grade, or the amount is really low, say less than 10%. If the faculty member is never mentioning the system, never using the learning analytics from the system, the students don't see that as a value. So they were very frustrated by the cost of the courseware in terms of its value. They also just didn't feel like they got good direction from the faculty about their purchasing options. On our campus, it's always more expensive for students to buy things at the bookstore, but they said faculty weren't always well informed about where else students could purchase the courseware, and if students wanted to go directly to the publisher or to a third-party seller, say like Amazon, the instructors didn't really give clear directions on which version to buy, make sure it has these elements. So students are just looking for a little more direction from faculty on purchasing options, and they want faculty to be aware of how much these things cost in terms of the value it adds to the learning experience.
Thanks, Patty. So given all of these findings and having conducted these focus groups with students and also the surveys that y'all conducted as well, what would you say from your perspective in doing this research, what are the key takeaways that faculty should kind of respond to this information? What can they take from it and in a way that would influence how they use this type of technology in their classroom?
Sure. So when I talk to faculty or we give presentations to faculty, we usually start with asking faculty what problem they're trying to solve with this technology. To just adopt technology for the sake of technology doesn't really make any sense. And students can tell when that's happening because it's not integrated into the course. It's just an add-on. It's an additional cost burden. It's an additional technology burden. It's an additional time suck for the students. So unless the courseware is addressing a specific problem that's happening in the class, I guess I would question why faculty would want to use it in the first place. But going from there, if you know what problem you're solving and you've chosen your product, again, I'll go back to cost. I really think faculty need to consider the cost of products. I think they can maybe negotiate with vendors for lower costs for students. They maybe should consider, is there an open educational resource that I can use that would be free to students, that can replace an expensive textbook. I just think that one thing faculty could do at the get-go is not just kind of blindly adopt things, but to really think about the impact it's going to have on students in terms of cost. The other really big thing that came out of the focus groups was just this alignment with your course. If the learning objectives of your lectures and the learning objectives of the courseware are not aligned, if they are not the same, that's going to be a big problem for students. And so I would say that's a basic thing faculty can do. If you don't like the learning objectives of a particular courseware product, then maybe that's not the courseware product you should be using. Or if you like the learning objectives of the particular courseware product and it's tied to a book you use, make sure that the lectures follow along with those and they're not way off doing something else, because that really confuses students. They don't know what to focus on. They don't know which resource is going to help them succeed in the class. And finally, this seems basic, but from student feedback, it seems like this isn't happening a lot. I would tell faculty they should try to become familiar with the products that they're adopting, maybe even ask the vendor to give them a special view, a student view, and go before the course even starts, go through the entire course in the courseware in student view, so they can see what their students are experiencing, so that they can troubleshoot any problems with the courseware, any glitches, any misalignment issues. I think that would be really important. And then after the course is underway, constantly soliciting student feedback to see how you can improve the use of the courseware. Sometimes students find features of the courseware that faculty don't know about, and students think it's really useful, and they can share that with faculty. So I guess those three things I would say: that considering the cost, aligning the learning objectives of the lecture with the courseware, and becoming familiar with how the products work.
Thank you, Patty. Yeah, I would point out too, so APLU is part of our grant work. We've been visiting with a lot of other institutions as part of that and doing kind of informal focus groups with students. And they're saying many of the same things about cost, and in particular about misalignment and the importance of making sure that the courseware is integrated into the course design and pedagogy so that they feel like it's worth their time and not just some sort of side piece set aside for homework purposes, right? They don't see the value in that necessarily. So thank you for that. Now, Guy and Karen, I want to turn to you since you've been, teaching this course and doing this work for quite some time. If you could speak to briefly on kind of how your students have responded, your perspective, either positively or negatively, on using an adaptive platform in your course, or even just speaking more generally from your experience of how what you've noticed is different with your students compared to what you used to do before you adopted this platform.
Sure. So, Patty's summary gives some of the information in terms of the overall attitude from students, and I'll try to speak more specifically in my classes, and as Karen will. The positives. One of the things Patty mentioned is multiple attempts at assessments. This has been something that my students really enjoy, being able to go back into material, take their time with it if they need to, increasing scores. I mean, obviously they're results driven. And so for them to see a 50% on the first quiz and then see an 80% on the second quiz, that is doing a world of good for them in multiple ways. One, I think it's building confidence. Two, it's them seeing the tangible result of putting in the work. So, the ability to just do, because with papers, teachers can do revision. We can allow students to rewrite, but I think they see that as a pretty daunting task, even when they're allowed to revise papers. With the content-based quizzes, I think they feel far more in control of going in and doing that. I haven't seen too much negative. I teach first semester, first year students, so they don't really have a great sense of what their first college writing course is going to be like. So when I come in and explain that they're going to write some papers and that they're going to use these adaptive modules that we use, they don't seem to have any sort of negative feelings toward that. I do explain that we have taken away textbook materials and substituted them with these lower cost resources that they can use, and I think they like that, obviously, for reasons of saving money and still being able to get at what they are doing. One of the other things Patty mentioned was the alignment. I think our department is the perfect example of showing what can happen when there's strong alignment with the modules and the resources that they're using, and then the larger projects that they're working on. I tie the module work that my students are doing very closely to the major projects. We talk about them in class. We talk about how they've done the quizzes. We do reflections on those. I don't think that my students ever feel like they're doing something extra or what's the word, busy work. I don't think that they feel like that at all. I think they feel like a strong tie to the larger work that they're doing. And for the most part, my students say that in their reflections and their survey responses, that they are seeing positive results from the adaptive work that they're doing in translating that into their larger work.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, to speak to another point that Patty made. She gave the advice to faculty that figure out what problem you're trying to solve with adaptive courseware. So the problem that we were trying to solve was readiness gaps. We have students who come to the University of Mississippi with all levels of preparation and composition. And so we specifically designed these modules to address those readiness gaps. And what we found in student responses, particularly in their reflections, is that they use the modules in the ways that are most purposeful for them. So our students who are very well prepared say, I had this in high school, but I used the modules as a refresher, and that was very helpful. And our students who are less prepared said, I've never heard of this before. We talked about it in class, but I used the modules to really help me understand the concept deeply. And so I think that told us that, yes, we saw a problem, we designed it to address that problem, and that students are in fact responding in the way that we hoped they would.
So we should probably clarify, because we talk about this so much, when we say module, what we mean.
Yeah.
We're working with Lumen's Waymaker platform, which is OER-based, personalized and adaptive learning. So what we essentially did is, we gathered OER resources from lots of different places, added some of our own content and put it together in a way that we created a certain number of kind of weekly mini modules for the course that can be plugged in to the existing curriculum. So when we say module, that just means, in the language of some of the other platforms, like a chapter or a section.
Right, or
It's what they would complete in any week of the course. And it is more or less tailored specifically to our environment.
Thank you for clarifying that for me. Guy or Karen, did you want to add anything else on that point, or we good?
Yeah, I mentioned briefly about quiz scores and multiple attempts, and as Patty said, students really love the multiple attempts. Our students are given 2 attempts at each assessment for the module, so each weekly assessment or each weekly module, as Andrew pointed out. But we actually have the power to go in and grant those students additional attempts at those quizzes. So I think, I think Karen would say the same thing. I'm this way, and many of our teachers are. I don't ever want these quizzes or assessments to be something punitive for students. I don't ever want them to think, oh, my grade was brought down by the adaptive or personalized work they did. I want my students to, if I have to say, or grant them 4 or 5 attempts at a quiz, if they'll go in and spend the time and feel more confident about it, that's great. I think it's a win-win for everybody. And so I can't even think of any instances of feedback from my own students where they thought this was something that was negatively impacting their grade. Patty's talking about a larger survey set, a larger data set, so I completely understand that. But I think in our department, many of our teachers work to make sure that that is not something that our students would say.
Well, and I guess I would just add one more thing. A comment that comes up from students quite a bit is, a writing course is a pretty personalized environment anyway, very small classes, lots of one-on-one conferencing with teachers. But the thing that has stuck with me is a comment that students often make, which is, I didn't really understand this when you told me about it in class, but when I had the chance to work on it in the platform, then I really understood it, which was, I think, is terrific. It gives students different ways to understand the material. And so I think that's been a really positive experience, because I tend to think of my class as pretty personalized and I'm answering as many questions as I can, but clearly students are gaining value even beyond that by using this courseware.
Yeah, and I would say that that's even maybe more true for maybe non-traditional students. So I'm thinking particularly of ESL or second language learners, because we talk in class and that can come in a million miles an hour to somebody who's taking on something new. But when they can go spend as much time as they want with the material outside of class, that's very beneficial.
Yeah. Just to jump in too, I do think one of the things that we got from the student focus groups is that students are really looking for efficiency. So like Guy was talking about how students love the autonomy of taking the quizzes over and over, and Karen touched upon that too, like the kids already have this, don't use it very much. The kids who aren't familiar with it, they can dig more deeply into the content. So they're using it to personalize it to their own experience, but also they're being efficient with it. And so one of the things about the quizzes is that I think faculty need to think about how are the quizzes set up and are they efficient? We talked to this one faculty member who was really frustrated that students wouldn't take advantage of doing a quiz more than once. And we asked students about that. We said, why wouldn't you take this quiz again? And they said, because the algorithm doesn't reward us for the things that we know. And so you take the quiz, and it's 20 math, it was a math course, 20 math questions with different learning objectives. And you could demonstrate mastery on six say, out of 20 different learning objectives. But when you took the quiz the next time, it didn't streamline it so that you were only practicing those 14 that you didn't understand. It gave you all 20 all over, again. And these quizzes, they just lasted so long. It took the students about an hour to get through each quiz. They said it's not worth it. And so this whole, they're operating under this idea of efficiency of time. They are trying to get through the content as efficiently as possible. Not meaning that they're not serious about their learning, but they, like the rest of us, they have limited time and they want to do things efficiently.
Well, and one thing that we survey our students independent of the surveys that Patty does. And one of the questions we always ask is, how long does it take you on average to complete a module? Because when we designed it, we said we want these to take no more than an hour a week. And we found that for the most part, students are in that 30 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes range for the module. And you're right, as long as there's a lower time commitment and barrier to entry, as long as it's not technologically complex and they can just go into the LMS, click through it and do it, they're going to be much more friendly towards it than they would be something that takes a whole lot of time to learn and a whole lot of time to work your way through.
That's a good point. Yeah, that user experience is really, really important. The students already have multiple logins. The systems, the process of getting to the content and going through the content is different. So there's already an intellectual burden on the students of just learning the technology and knowing, from system to system how to use this. So we're already kind of taxing them already intellectually. And so, yeah, like Andrew said, if we're taxing them further with inefficient systems, they're just not going to bother. Yeah.
No, thank you all for that. And you actually addressed one of the questions that came in just by having that conversation organically. So I appreciate that. So I'm going to move on to the next question that we had for you that was more about how, for our faculty and also Andrew as an instructional designer, what ways are you using student feedback to improve how you teach your course or design your courses, and how you're using the adaptive systems?
So I can briefly explain what our process is each year. We survey all of our students, or at least ask them to complete surveys. We normally get like 60% response rates, which is pretty good. And we ask questions like, how long does it take you to get through each module? Which modules did you find beneficial? Which ones did you find not beneficial? Questions like that, all kind of sorted through about their general experience with the platform, also tagged to their instructor. And then what we can do is we can cross that data with the data we get out of Waymaker from Lumen by instructor, by section, to see, okay, where is there overlap? For the modules that students are saying I had difficulty with or I didn't find relevant, does that correlate to the scores we're seeing, to the amount of time that the analytics say they're spending on each page? And each year, in part of a continuous improvement cycle, what we do is we take that information and target specific parts of the courseware that need improvement. If we look at a module that, just for example, one of our modules, which we called it a readability module, we found was underperforming based on all of these different data points. And this summer, we got together a group of faculty to redesign and redevelop that module into something that would be more well aligned with what our students needed to have. So I mean, it's kind of a multifaceted approach, taking student qualitative data, actual assessment data from the platform, as well as input from kind of informal settings. What are your students saying in their reflections? What are they saying when they come to office hours? All of that's kind of put together to determine, what we do as a group to make the product better year after year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, speaking to some of that in terms of that individual relationship with students, I think so. for example, student conferences or feedback on papers with students, I can take information from the adaptive data that I have, from the module data that I have, and speak directly with students about that. So, for example, when my students work on an argument, and I've got data from how they performed on the modules and things like using sources, I can pull that up while I'm meeting with a student and say, I can see that you're struggling with this here. Let's talk about how that's going to work, how that's going to apply in your paper. Or when I provide feedback on a final copy of a paper, I can point back to something from a module and say that, you performed well or performed poorly on that. Let's investigate where the disconnect here on the application was. So I certainly think that it's improved the way I can communicate with students one-to-one, one-on-one, whether that's face-to-face or written feedback. And I also think that it leaves me guessing less. I think before I used adaptive learning, I would often speculate. This student doesn't know this, or this student might be being lazy, and I think that's a bad way to teach. I think any way I can know more and stop guessing as much, I think is very helpful for me.
And I think that, just to build on what Guy just said, composition is a little bit different, because the way that we traditionally see whether a student is understanding rhetorical concepts is whether he or she's able to display them in writing. And so when we pulled these modules in, it gave us a way to see whether they understood the concept on an abstract level. I understand what pathos is, and we're not applying it in their paper. And that is that gap that Guy was speaking to, where we were assuming beforehand from reading the paper, this student doesn't understand what pathos is. But now we can say, oh, the student understands what pathos is, she just doesn't know how to apply it in this situation. And so for us, that's a really important piece of the puzzle that we didn't have before. And I think we've used it then to say, as Guy was saying, to the student individually, okay, I know you know what this is, let's talk about how that might show up in your paper. So that's been super valuable for us.
Yeah, I think another area where the constant feedback loop is valuable is with students and with our faculty. Andrew alluded to this a little bit. Is we can ask students or get that information from reflections or surveys. What modules are helpful for them? Or one of the things we've asked is what's missing? What could we add to this that would help you with the major projects you're working on? When we get data like that from students and from our faculty, we feel like we can customize and continue to modify the product that we have to be the best available for semester to semester.
Well, and it really speaks to Patty's point about alignment, because the students are the best ones to tell you whether what's happening in the courseware is actually applicable to what they're doing in the course. So that feedback for us has been super valuable.
Well, and just to underscore, what makes all of this work is open educational resources. That when you're working with a proprietary copyrighted published content, that might be a lot harder to do, because it's a lot harder to swap in and out. I mean, some platforms, I know that you've worked with one of them, make it easier to do that. But in general, you need to have the flexibility to make changes, to add things, subtract things, even change the wording of individual sections and questions. One of the things we found is that, students are missing this question over and over and over again just because the wording of a single paragraph is ambiguous. So having that flexibility to be able to make changes on the fly to your content is really essential to doing what we've done here, at least.
Absolutely, and it's light years ahead of where we were, just a couple decades ago. I mean, if you think about a textbook, we're doing the equivalent of doing major editing to a textbook in live real time. So that could be rolled out for the following semester versus, with the years or semesters between editions of a textbook that might have addressed those in the past.
And I think asking students for feedback involves them in the process. It shows them that you care about their learning. I'll never forget when I first started talking to student groups about this. I had this one student, he was a STEM major, and he was just sat there in shock. And I asked him, what's going through your head? And he said, I just can't believe someone is asking us what our experience is. He's like, I just figured nobody cared. And he described, you know, his first day of class, and this is awful, but his first day of class as a freshman, on one of his classes, his professor said to him, 50% of you are going to fail. And he said he heard that more than once in these classes. And he said, you know, he felt like it was an academic hazing ritual. And that's always stuck with me, this academic hazing ritual, like we want you to fail. And he said that me asking, or in the focus groups, us asking them, what's working for you? What's not working for you? It turns that whole thing around. It tells them, we want you to succeed. We want to work with you to succeed. We're not trying to flush you out of the system. And I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, thank you all for that. I appreciate it. A couple of questions on my own, but I do also want to open it up for the Q&A portion as well, and just remind our attendees that you are able to submit any questions that you have through the Q&A feature. So please go ahead and enter those there. I do have a couple questions I'll go ahead and get us started with. So Karen, you had mentioned that the problem you were trying to solve was readiness.
Yes.
Do you feel like you've been able to address that? And have there been other sort of unintended things that have been problems that have been solved through doing this work as well?
I feel like we have been able to address it. You know, it takes a long time to learn how to write. And so I always tell the story about a student who comes in and views herself as kind of a C writer and leaves the course as kind of a C writer, and then worries that she hasn't learned anything. And I think one of the ways that we use this courseware, because our projects do get more difficult as the semester goes on, and it's entirely possible that you've learned a lot, but you're still looking at that same grade. One of the things that we're able to do with this courseware is to say, you have learned a lot. Look at what you've learned through this courseware. Look at the way that you've taken on these concepts. And yeah, maybe you're not at the stage yet where these concepts are being applied to your writing, but that'll come as you continue to write in college and as you continue to grow. So I think it really has helped us. A, we understand those readiness gaps better as instructors. And then I think our students have really been able to fill in the places that they didn't come prepared with.
Absolutely. I think first year comp classes in general, I know ours is one, but this is common across the country. They're doing different tasks. So as Karen was, it would be difficult in a lot of ways for a student to see a major gain in some ways, because we'll move from analysis to something, you know, to something of reflection or argument. And so they aren't getting sustained time. And it's, you know, 14, 15 weeks is not a lot of time for a student to show massive improvement in their writing. But one of the things that this work has helped us do is, as Karen said earlier, see that, okay, they understand some of this more than we think. And so I think that application will probably come, or at least the confidence to approach these situations differently in the future is going to be there. So yeah, I mean, I certainly in many cases can say, I know that student has closed some of that gap.
And one of the things I've really loved in reading my students writing about the courseware, because we do ask them to write about the courseware, is they really own that in the writing too. The students who are using it to refresh are very honest about just using it to refresh. But the students who are really using it to learn material that they didn't have will write about how much they've learned through it. And so that's important, because they're the only ones who can speak to that. They're the ones who know what they didn't know and what they know now.
Yeah, and I think that gets to the second part of your question, Megan, is that, you know, I mean, one unintended thing, I didn't think about it a lot at first, is that when I read to our students do an end of this semester reflection, a larger reflective piece. I think I've read many of those from my students where I think they're saying very meaningful things about what they took on and where they struggled and where they gained. And, you know, so I think that that's even if, as Karen mentioned, even if the grade doesn't necessarily show a huge improvement, I think they're going forward with things that they can point to and say, I know I understand this, or I know I'm still a little weak in this, and I can continue to work on that.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions from our attendees, so I'll go ahead and get started on those. So first of all, they're saying thank you for sharing this work, and you are all awesome. How are your faculty colleagues adapting to this type of instructional approach? And do you provide training for new faculty? Do you meet regularly with other faculty, discuss what is helping students improve their writing? There were a lot of questions in there, but they're all kind of collectively associated with each other.
And they're great questions too. I think that especially anytime you're dealing with a lot of people, and we are dealing with a lot of people, you know, we regularly have, you know, between 50 or 60 people teaching, you know, in a given year teaching at least one section with these modules. So, I mean, one of the short answers there is you're never going to please 50 or 60 people with one product or offering. But I think that one of the ways we've addressed that is by trying to, Andrew mentioned earlier, bringing faculty in on the development or the modifying of the existing products, letting them feel like they have a voice in what we're using. One thing we didn't mention earlier is that the original ideas for our first set of the first 8 modules we created all came from faculty survey. We sent out things to our faculty and asked them what would be helpful for us to create in module form that might help you spend less time in the classroom on it and devote more to writing, or, you know, cover something that's tricky that you don't want to necessarily cover that can be done in another way. So we've tried to include them from the start and make sure that their voices are heard and being realized in the product. But you'll always have a couple of people who are resistant, especially in composition, when they're so used to writing. Content-based stuff is a little tricky for some, but I would say overall that the experience has been positive.
Well, and what I would say is, and this is probably not as true for a lot of the other disciplines, but the disciplinary bias in composition and the humanities against quantitative assessment is really strong. But once you can convince someone to overcome that and set it aside, I think our faculty are finding that they're learning a lot about learning outcomes. They're learning a lot about, you know, rhetoric as a field and rhetoric as knowledge that isn't necessarily captured in just student writing. I think that once you can convince faculty to be open-minded to a different approach, they start to see there's a lot of useful stuff here. And I think that it's gradual, but we're starting to see that here. Because at first there was a lot more resistance than there is now.
Right. Well, and one of the things that I will say, especially since this is about student feedback, is our first year was rocky, but of course we surveyed students during that first year, and they were much more positive about the courseware than our faculty were. And I think our faculty, because they are very student-centered, saw that and said, there must be something here that I'm not taking into account. And so that's been really helpful for us to say, here's what students find valuable about this and the ways in which they find it valuable. I think that brought some feedback, or some buy-in for us.
Definitely. I mean, I alluded to it earlier, you know, for our students that never seen anything differently. When they're coming into their first college course, this is what they saw. They were okay with it, right? Whereas the faculty, it was a change for the faculty, whereas it wasn't for the students necessarily. So, but yeah, Karen's absolutely right. I think as they see positive student feedback, they buy in more, and we grow and gain from that. So.
And just to answer, so yes, we do provide training.
Oh yeah. I skipped that part. It's a lot of questions.
So for this department, we've brought in Lumen several times.
Yes.
As a group or individually or in pairs, we've gone out to Lumen and we've met them at conferences to talk about the product. So that's kind of the situation for the Department of Writing and Rhetoric. In other departments, you know, every department has its own culture, but we do, just because there's not a lot of us doing this on campus, we don't have a big department full of instructional designers to take this on. So we rely pretty heavily on the vendors to do trainings, and most departments will bring in the vendors once or twice a year. when classes are not in session, to review new features of the courseware, or to onboard new faculty to the courseware, or to answer questions about how something was functioning over the previous semester, and if something went wrong, how can we fix that? So there's a lot of that happening at the department level. We're not necessarily organizing. In the beginning, I organized that university-wide, but now it's really happening at the department level.
Yeah, and because locally, because us three were builders, we are able to address a lot of questions from our faculty. And I'd say Andrew more so than others, because he's an instructional designer. Even Karen and I are resources for our faculty with some of the questions they have.
Well, and it's an important thing to consider that there's a scale of technical complexity with all of these vendors, and it's a trade-off. That some of the more sophisticated platforms can do some really impressive stuff with algorithms. Those are also the ones that are more complicated and have a higher barrier of entry for faculty. Waymaker, is a minimalist approach to adaptive learning. There's not a whole lot to it. There's not a whole lot of training to do. The training is mostly pedagogical. The technical side of it is very simple, but you don't get all the fancy bells and whistles that some of the other platforms provide. So you kind of have to decide what problem you're trying to fix and what you need to solve before you pick the technical solution for it. Right?
Did we answer that question, Megan?
I think I asked 3 of them, I think, and I think you've answered all of them sufficiently. So thank you all for that.
Remember parts of the question.
Yes.
We'll get there. So like the team and collaborative effort. So which also brings me to another question is, so Guy, you talked about kind of the alignment within your own course of integrating the courseware into your course design, so it feels seamless and worthwhile to the students. I'm curious, and other folks are curious to know about how, and obviously you all are working together, but how much of faculty alignment across sections is going on, and is there an effort to take this work, like how far have you scaled it, and what has your experience been like pursuing that in your department?
So, some of the previous answer works here too. when you're dealing with that many people, you'll have some instances that make you scratch your head a little bit. I think overall I'm pleased. I shouldn't start off with a negative, because I think that there have been a lot of people who see the value and they work it into their course and they make sure students know, how it pertains to the larger assignments. We've had a few situations where I think that maybe teachers are just saying you have to complete these modules at some time, and then the student feedback from that tends to be more negative, because I don't think the students see the direct connection with what they're working on. The other thing is, when that's going on, teachers are far less likely to be talking about those specific modules and how they're, how something might connect to the larger paper they're working on, or as I mentioned earlier, feedback, or in conferencing, they're far less likely to be providing looking at the data and talking about those things in conferences and feedback. But that's not a lot of what's happening overall. Our students, we had the last couple surveys have been near 70%, with students saying they see they think that the modules were helpful in their larger work on the projects, and that and that's with the problems we're having. I think that data would be higher if everybody was on board using things the same way. But I don't really worry. You're never going to have that many people all on the exact same page, so I try not to stress about that too much. I think the best way we go forward with that and trying to bring up that student satisfaction and the faculty buy-in is continue to make them involved in decisions. As Andrew pointed out, we were able to bring in 3 of our faculty members this summer who helped develop a new module. They certainly feel ownership in that, and the more we can do that, the more we will have people saying, I see what the point of this is, I see how it fits in my class, and I see what the students gain from that.
That's true.
Thanks. All right, I'm going to task you, because we have like 1 or 2 more minutes to talk on this before I go ahead and close this out. So whoever wants to respond to this. So you had mentioned continuous improvement cycle, and this is something that comes up often on the campuses that we're working with. For those faculty and programs, or even, I guess, faculty support staff who are trying to integrate more of a continuous improvement mentality and culture at their institutions, what advice would you offer them?
I can give you an example of a pharmacy course here on campus where we had an instructional designer go meet with and this course had, I don't know, 30% DFW rates, Ds, Fs, and withdrawals. So the problem the faculty member wanted to solve was, how do I address these high failure rates, or Ds, meaning the student can't move on in the course. And so the instructional designer did a couple of really interesting things. She observed the class, she met with students in weren't really focus groups, but just listening sessions with students. And then she, did an analysis of the syllabus, and then, some of the high stakes assignments. And what she really did was she honed in on 3 quick fixes to the course to improve things. But that was based on student feedback. It was also based on data that she'd gotten, where are students falling down in the course. But just to say that that very targeted analysis from someone who's not teaching the course really helped turn that course around. And some of the things they did, she made sure that the faculty member didn't really have to change all that much. So he didn't have to revamp the course entirely. They didn't change the courseware. He didn't have to change the way he was lecturing. But there were just some basic things that they did. And in one semester, they went from 30% DFWs to like 5%. Yeah, it was amazing, but it was really having an outsider come in and assess, like someone who's a learning specialist, assess it. And I think it's hard for us to assess our own work, our own courses. So we're talking about getting student feedback. If your university has the resources to have learning specialists or instructional designers to help you identify gaps in teaching and learning in the class. And it's not to say faculty are doing things wrong. It's just to say that it's hard to assess our own work. So I don't know, that was just one example that happened recently on our campus. And it seems like a really effective approach.
Yeah, well, and what I can say for, a department-wide culture of continuous improvement, I think what has been important for us is to really promote the concept of openness, open data, open educational resources, open course materials, open teaching and learning materials. We've really kind of been striving over the last few years to make everything we do as transparent as possible. So all of our faculty see, what the data says, what other people are teaching with, what all the syllabi say, and that breaks down those barriers that might exist between individual instructors, sections, and curricula, and kind of gets people more enthusiastic about making changes if they can see the whole landscape of what your department is doing.
And what's cool about your department too is you're actually answering the question, what do you want to improve on? When you think about the continuous improvement cycle, improve on what? Are we improving the student success rates? Are we improving faculty satisfaction with the way we're teaching the courses? Like, what are we trying to improve? And I think your department's doing a really good job of identifying those things through feedback.
I want to go ahead and thank all of you, Patty and Karen and Andrew and Guy, for joining us today and for all of the information. I'm also interested in figuring out what those 3 practices were, Patty, that led to such an improvement in the DFW rate. So we have to talk later about that, and we'll share that out at some point. Yeah. For our attendees, I want to thank everybody for submitting your questions. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to each of them. Now, if you want to hear more about what other webinars we are going to be offering, you can follow APLU on Twitter, and we're going to go ahead and share that information now. You can also follow some of that on Every Learner as well. And if you are interested in learning more about our folks in the Writing and Rhetoric departments, there's their information as well. We were going to be having another webinar two additional webinars in November. One's going to be a part of the faculty series, and then we're also going to be kicking off our administrative series on adaptive. And then we'll have an additional one in December as well. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. There's also going to be a survey that will automatically pop up when you exit out of this webinar. And if you don't get that one, we'll send one to you in email as well. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today and have a great one. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect timing.